Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands, August 19, 1942. The temperature hung at 87 degrees with 90% humidity as Private First Class Daniel Kershaw wiped the moisture from his Springfield rifle for the fourth time that morning. Somewhere in the dense jungle canopy above Henderson Field, enemy observers were coordinating artillery strikes that had already wounded 3 men in his platoon. His company commander had just informed them that trained enemy marksmen had taken positions in the coconut groves 200 yards ahead, and conventional infantry tactics were proving useless against an adversary who could disappear into vegetation and emerge yards away without a sound. Every Marine in Fox Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, believed they understood jungle warfare after 3 weeks on this miserable island. They would soon discover how catastrophically wrong they were about everything. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. It really helps support the channel. What Daniel carried that morning would transform him from the most ridiculed man in his unit into a legend whose methods would be studied by military academies for generations, proving that sometimes the wisdom of farmers and hunters exceeds the doctrine of generals, and that the tools dismissed by experts can change the course of entire campaigns when placed in the right hands. Daniel had grown up in rural Montana, where his father ran a modest cattle operation that bordered national forest land. By age 12, he was responsible for protecting livestock from predators, a task that taught him patience and precision with limited ammunition. His family could not afford expensive hunting rifles, so when he turned 16 in 1938, he saved earnings from seasonal work and ordered a Remington Model 721 rifle from a Sears catalog for $23.50. The rifle was marketed to farmers and recreational shooters, built with a simple bolt-action mechanism and equipped with basic iron sights that most serious hunters would have immediately replaced. His father had been skeptical about the purchase, suggesting Daniel save for a Winchester Model 70, like the ranchers in the valley preferred. But Daniel had read every specification in the catalog, noting that the Remington chambered the standard .30-06 cartridge, featured a sturdy walnut stock, and came with a reputation for reliability that exceeded its modest price. For the next 3 years, he used that rifle to protect cattle, hunt elk in the high country, and win informal shooting competitions at the county fair. He learned to compensate for the rifle's limitations through fieldcraft and patience, often spending hours in a single position waiting for the perfect shot, rather than relying on superior equipment to overcome poor positioning. When he enlisted in the Marine Corps in December 1941, 1 week after the attack on Pearl Harbor, he attempted to bring his personal rifle to boot camp at Camp Pendleton. The drill instructors laughed openly at the request. Sergeant Maxwell Morrison, a career Marine with 14 years of service, held the civilian rifle at arm's length as if it were contaminated. "Son, this is a tool for shooting rabbits and maybe deer if you're lucky," Morrison said, his voice carrying across the barracks. "We're training to defeat an empire that has conquered half of Asia. You'll be issued a Springfield M1903, a rifle designed by military engineers and tested in 2 wars. Whatever you learned plinking cans on your daddy's farm won't mean a thing in real combat." Daniel said nothing, accepting the standard issue rifle and beginning the intensive training that would prepare him for jungle warfare. But he noticed something during marksmanship training that troubled him. The Springfield rifles issued to most Marines were reliable and accurate at reasonable distances, but they were heavy at 9.6 pounds unloaded. Designed for warfare, where soldiers advanced across open ground in coordinated assaults, the Marines preparing for jungle operations in the Pacific would face an entirely different kind of conflict, one where mobility and concealment mattered more than the ability to fix bayonets for close combat. His personal Remington weighed 7.2 pounds, a difference that seemed insignificant in training, but would become crucial during long patrols through terrain where every ounce added to exhaustion. More importantly, the Remington's simplified bolt action was less prone to jamming from the fine volcanic sand and constant moisture that characterized Pacific Islands. Daniel kept these observations to himself, knowing that challenging military doctrine as a new recruit would only bring punishment and ridicule. By July 1942, he had deployed to the Pacific Theater aboard a transport ship, crowded with 3,000 Marines who sang patriotic songs and wrote letters home assuring families they would make quick work of an enemy they had been taught to view as inferior. Daniel spent his time differently, studying maps of Pacific islands and noting the vegetation patterns, elevation changes, and seasonal weather conditions that would affect combat operations. He also noticed that several veterans of the campaigns in the Philippines carried non-standard equipment they had acquired through unofficial channels, suggesting that practical experience often contradicted official supply doctrine. The landing at Guadalcanal came on August 7th, and for 11 days, Fox Company encountered only sporadic resistance as they secured Henderson Field and began constructing defensive positions. Then Japanese forces launched a major counterattack on August 18th, and everything changed. Enemy troops demonstrated a mastery of jungle warfare that shocked American commanders who had underestimated their tactical sophistication. They moved through vegetation without creating noticeable disturbance, established concealed positions that were invisible until they opened fire, and employed marksmen who could identify and eliminate leadership targets with precision that exceeded anything the Marines had anticipated. On the morning of August 19th, Lieutenant Thomas Bradford gathered his platoon for a briefing that revealed genuine concern behind his professional demeanor. Bradford was 24 years old, a graduate of the Naval Academy, who had requested infantry duty despite family connections that could have secured a safer staff position. He spread a hand-drawn map across an ammunition crate and pointed to an area marked with multiple red circles. Intelligence indicates enemy observers are directing artillery from positions in these coconut groves, Bradford explained, his finger tracing a line 200 yards from their current position. Regular patrols have failed to locate them. They're using elevated positions and disappearing before our men can return effective fire. We need volunteers for a reconnaissance operation to identify their location so we can call in our own artillery. Nobody spoke. The previous day's patrol had lost 2 men to enemy marksmen who fired from concealed positions and vanished before anyone could identify their location. The Marines understood that volunteering for this mission meant exposing themselves to opponents who had already proven their superiority in this particular form of combat. Daniel raised his hand. "Sir, I'd like to volunteer, but I have a request." Bradford looked surprised. Kershaw had been quiet during their time on the island, competent but unremarkable in the chaos of the initial landing. "What kind of request, Private?" "Permission to retrieve my personal rifle from the supply depot, sir. It's better suited for this kind of work than the Springfield." The other Marines laughed. Corporal James Mitchell, a factory worker from Detroit who had established himself as the platoon's informal comedian, spoke up immediately. "Kershaw wants to fight the Japanese with a mail-order rifle he probably bought with soda bottle deposits. Sir, this I have got to see." Even Bradford smiled, though he tried to maintain professional composure. "Private, the Springfield is the finest infantry rifle in our arsenal. It has served Marines with distinction since 1903. "Yes, sir," Daniel replied calmly, "and it's an excellent rifle for the kind of warfare we expected to fight. But with respect, nobody expected this kind of environment or these tactics. My rifle weighs 2.4 pounds less, has a smoother bolt action that's less likely to jam in this humidity, and I have fired it approximately 6,000 times over 4 years. I know exactly how it performs under various conditions." The practical logic of his argument impressed Bradford despite his skepticism about civilian equipment. "You really think you can locate enemy positions with a catalog rifle?" "I think I can locate them and eliminate the threat, sir, but I'll need time to work, not a patrol rushing through the area. This requires patience, not firepower." Bradford considered this. Traditional Marine doctrine emphasized aggressive action and overwhelming force, but that approach had failed repeatedly against an enemy who refused to fight on those terms. Perhaps unconventional problems required unconventional solutions. "All right, Kershaw, you have permission to retrieve your rifle. You'll leave at 0600 tomorrow with Corporal Mitchell as your spotter. Mitchell, your job is to keep him alive and verify any successful shots." Dismissed. That evening, Daniel retrieved the Remington from where it had been stored among personal effects the Marines were not permitted to carry into combat. Some equipment officer had tagged it with a label reading, non-standard item, recreational use only, which made him smile. He spent 2 hours cleaning every component, checking the barrel for any signs of corrosion from storage in tropical humidity, and testing the bolt action repeatedly until he was satisfied it would function perfectly. He also prepared 20 rounds of ammunition, standard military 30-06 cartridges that would work identically in his rifle or the issued Springfields. Mitchell appeared while he was working, carrying his own rifle and wearing an expression mixing curiosity with continued skepticism. "Kershaw, I've been ordered to watch your back tomorrow, so I need to know you're not going to get us both killed with that toy. Be straight with me. Can you actually shoot, or is this some kind of death wish because you're homesick?" Daniel looked up from his cleaning. "Corporal, at home I was responsible for protecting 60 head of cattle from wolves and mountain lions. My father could not afford to lose livestock, and I could not afford to waste ammunition. I learned to make one shot count from positions where the animal had no idea I was there. That is exactly what we need to do tomorrow." "The Japanese are not animals," Mitchell said, his voice hardening. "They're trained soldiers who have been winning this conflict since it started. They've conquered the Philippines, Singapore, Burma, and half of China. What makes you think farm boy skills will make a difference?" "Because they have never fought farmers who understand patience," Daniel replied. "All their victories came from speed, surprise, and aggression. Tomorrow, we are going to show them what happens when they face someone willing to sit absolutely still for hours and take one perfect shot, instead of firing blindly and hoping for the best." They departed before dawn, moving slowly through vegetation still wet with morning dew. Daniel had insisted on leaving all non-essential equipment behind, carrying only his rifle, ammunition, water, and a small pair of binoculars he had borrowed from the supply sergeant. Mitchell followed with his Springfield and a notebook to document their observations for the intelligence section. The coconut groves Lieutenant Bradford had identified were approximately 230 yards from the Marine defensive line, a distance that required them to cross open ground that would expose them to enemy observation. Instead of approaching directly, Daniel led them on a circuitous route that added half a mile to their journey, but kept them concealed in secondary growth vegetation. It took 90 minutes to reach a position he had selected by studying the terrain the previous evening. The location was unimpressive, a slight depression behind a fallen palm tree that provided minimal cover, but it offered a clear view of the coconut grove's southern edge, and more importantly, placed them downwind from the area where enemy positions were most likely established. Daniel settled into a prone position and became absolutely motionless, a skill he had developed during countless hours waiting for livestock predators that would flee at the slightest movement or unnatural sound. Mitchell positioned himself 3 feet away, trying to match Daniel's stillness and quickly discovering how difficult it was to remain completely immobile, while insects crawled across exposed skin and sweat pooled in uncomfortable places. He whispered, "How long do we wait?" "However long it takes," Daniel murmured without moving his lips. "They are looking for movement, sudden sounds, anything that indicates human presence. We give them nothing." 30 minutes passed, then an hour. The sun rose higher and the temperature climbed into the 90s. Mitchell's respect for Daniel's discipline grew as he watched the younger Marine maintain absolute stillness despite the brutal conditions. This was not the impatient farm boy he had expected, but someone whose training had been earned through necessity rather than formal instruction. At 09:15, Daniel's voice came as barely a whisper. "Coconut palm, 70 yards ahead, 15 feet up. Do you see movement on the north side of the trunk?" Mitchell raised his binoculars slowly, scanning the area Daniel had indicated. At first he saw nothing but vegetation and morning shadows. Then a slight irregularity caught his attention, a shape that did not quite match the organic patterns around it. As he watched, the shape shifted fractionally, and he realized he was looking at a human figure concealed in a carefully constructed platform that blended perfectly with its surroundings. "Confirmed," Mitchell whispered. "He's wearing some kind of vegetation covering." I would have walked right past him. "They are using individual observation posts instead of grouped positions," Daniel said, his voice still barely audible. "Smart tactic. Harder to locate, harder to eliminate multiple targets with one artillery strike. They are adapting to our superior firepower by dispersing. He settled his cheek against the rifle stock and began the process he had repeated thousands of times on Montana mountainsides. First, estimate range and wind conditions. The distance was approximately 70 yards, close enough that bullet drop was negligible, but a slight breeze from the east would push the shot perhaps 2 inches at that range. Second, control breathing. Inhale slowly, exhale partially, hold. Third, focus exclusively on the target, letting everything else fade into irrelevance. Fourth, squeeze the trigger steadily rather than pulling suddenly. The Remington fired with a sharp crack that echoed across the grove. Mitchell saw the figure in the tree jerk and then become still in an unnatural position that indicated he would never move again. Before the sound had fully dissipated, Daniel had already worked the bolt, chambering a fresh round and scanning for additional targets. "One confirmed," Mitchell said, writing quickly in his notebook. "Time 09:23. 2 more positions visible now," Daniel murmured. "They will investigate the shot. Watch the trees between 70 and 90 yards, elevated positions, north-northeast." Mitchell searched the indicated area and spotted movement as 2 figures shifted in their concealed positions, trying to locate the source of the shot that had eliminated their comrade. They were well-trained and disciplined, not exposing themselves carelessly, but the need to identify a threat required movement that revealed their locations. Daniel fired again. The second target, positioned 82 yards away and 12 feet high in a palm tree, collapsed forward against the restraining ropes that had secured him to the trunk. Before anyone could react, Daniel had chambered another round and shifted aim to a third position. The shot took longer to set up, perhaps 5 seconds, but when the Remington cracked a third time, another enemy observer stopped moving. The entire engagement had lasted less than 20 seconds. 3 trained observers who had successfully concealed themselves from multiple patrols had been eliminated from a position they did not know was occupied until the moment each shot arrived. Mitchell stared at Daniel with an expression mixing shock and newfound respect. "Holy Mother of God, where did you learn to shoot like that?" "Montana," Daniel replied simply, already scanning for additional targets. "Out there, if you miss, your family does not eat, or you lose cattle your father cannot afford to replace. The pressure makes you careful." They remained in position for another 2 hours, as Daniel systematically located and eliminated 8 more enemy observers positioned throughout the coconut grove. Each shot was deliberate and precise, fired only when he had perfect certainty of target identification and clean impact trajectory. The Remington's lighter weight meant his arms did not tire from maintaining aim through extended periods, and the simplified bolt action proved faster and more reliable than the Springfield design, allowing him to chamber follow-up rounds in less time than it would have taken with the issued rifle. By 11:45, no movement was visible in the grove. Daniel had fired exactly 11 shots and achieved 11 successful engagements, a performance that would have seemed impossible to his drill instructors at Camp Pendleton. He had also identified 3 additional enemy positions that were too well concealed for safe engagement from his current location. He carefully noted their coordinates for the intelligence section. "We need to return," he told Mitchell. "They will send a patrol to investigate the silence, and we do not want to be here when they arrive." The journey back took longer because they moved with extreme caution, knowing that Japanese forces would be alert to American presence in the area. They reached friendly lines at 1300 hours. They exhausted and dehydrated, but successful beyond anything Lieutenant Bradford had anticipated. Bradford listened to Mitchell's report with an expression transitioning from disbelief to amazement. 11 confirmed eliminations in approximately 3 hours. "Corporal, are you absolutely certain about these numbers?" "Sir, I witnessed every shot," Mitchell replied. "I have never seen anything like it." Kershaw was not just shooting, he was hunting. He understood exactly where they would position themselves, how they would react to threats, and when they would expose themselves enough for a clean shot. That mail-order rifle performed flawlessly. Bradford turned to Daniel. "Private, the Marine Corps needs to know how you accomplished this. We have skilled marksmen who have been unable to locate these observers, let alone eliminate them. What did you do differently?" Daniel chose his words carefully, aware that he was essentially critiquing standard military doctrine. Sir, with respect, military training emphasizes aggression and firepower. Those are excellent approaches for conventional warfare where armies meet on open ground. But the Japanese are fighting a different kind of conflict here. They are using the environment as a weapon, relying on our impatience to expose ourselves while they remain hidden. I approached it the way I would approach hunting predators on rough terrain. Find a position with good visibility and concealment. Wait until they reveal themselves through necessary movement. Then take one certain shot instead of many uncertain ones. And the rifle? Bradford asked. Was that really superior to the Springfield, or was that just familiarity with your personal weapon? Both, sir. The Springfield is an excellent rifle for the warfare we trained to fight. But it is heavy, which causes fatigue during extended periods of aimed fire. The bolt action, while reliable, is slower than necessary for multiple targets, and the overall design reflects assumptions about warfare that do not match what we are experiencing here. My Remington is lighter, faster, and has been tested by me personally under varied conditions for 4 years. I know exactly where every shot will impact at any range up to 300 yards. That evening, word of Daniel's performance spread through Fox Company and then throughout 2nd Battalion. Marines who had dismissed him as a naive farm boy with inadequate equipment now sought him out for advice on fieldcraft and marksmanship. Sergeant Morrison, the drill instructor who had ridiculed his civilian rifle at Camp Pendleton, approached with an expression mixing embarrassment and professional curiosity. "Kershaw, I owe you an apology," Morrison said directly. "I assumed military equipment was automatically superior to civilian gear because that's what I was taught and what I've always believed. You proved that assumption wrong today. More importantly, you demonstrated skills that are desperately needed here. How many other Marines in this battalion can shoot the way you do?" Daniel considered the question carefully. "Sir, probably dozens have the raw capability. But shooting skill alone is not enough. You need patience, environmental awareness, and the mental discipline to remain absolutely still for hours while insects bite you and heat exhausts you. Those are not skills that come from marksmanship training. They come from necessity and experience. Can they be taught?" Morrison pressed. "We need more men who can do what you did today." "Some of it can be taught," Daniel acknowledged, "but the patience and discipline take time to develop, and time is something we do not have much of here." Over the following weeks, Daniel conducted similar operations throughout the Marine defensive perimeter, systematically eliminating enemy observers who had been directing artillery and providing intelligence on American positions. His methods were studied by intelligence officers who began adapting Marine doctrine to emphasize patience and precision over aggressive patrolling in jungle environments. The Remington rifle became a symbol of unconventional thinking, proving that sometimes the tools dismissed by experts could outperform standard equipment when used by someone who understood both the environment and the enemy. What made Daniel's success particularly significant was not just his shooting ability, but his understanding of psychology and behavior. He recognized that the Japanese forces were fighting according to their own doctrine, which emphasized surprise, mobility, and the psychological impact of invisible threats. By matching their patience and exceeding their precision, he turned their own tactics against them. Each eliminated observer was not just a military victory, but a psychological blow that forced enemy commanders to question their assumptions about American capabilities. By September, Japanese artillery effectiveness had diminished significantly in sectors where Daniel operated. Their observers had learned that American forces now included marksmen, who could detect concealed positions and engage from distances where return fire was ineffective. The knowledge that they were vulnerable, even in carefully prepared positions, affected their behavior, making them more cautious and less effective at gathering intelligence. Lieutenant Bradford was promoted to captain and given command of a rifle company, in part because of the innovative tactics his unit had developed. In his after-action reports, he emphasized the importance of adapting doctrine to actual conditions rather than adhering rigidly to pre-war assumptions. He specifically noted that equipment decisions should be based on operational requirements rather than tradition or bureaucratic inertia. Daniel himself received a promotion to corporal and was assigned to train other Marines in advanced marksmanship and fieldcraft. He discovered that teaching was more difficult than demonstrating, because the skills he had developed through years of necessity were difficult to transfer quickly to men who had grown up in cities and suburbs. But gradually, a cadre of capable marksmen emerged who could operate independently and achieve results that would have seemed impossible during their initial training. The Remington rifle continued to perform flawlessly throughout his deployment, validating his faith in the simple design he had purchased from a catalogue 4 years earlier. Other Marines began requesting permission to use personal firearms if they had civilian shooting experience, and the Corps gradually relaxed its rigid equipment policies to allow more flexibility for specialized operations. The recognition that standardization sometimes hindered effectiveness represented a significant evolution in military thinking. In November, Daniel received a letter from his father, delivered through the military postal system that was becoming more efficient as American forces consolidated their control over Guadalcanal. His father wrote about the ranch, the cattle, and the early snow that had already blanketed the high country, but the final paragraph revealed the real reason for the letter. Your old shooting instructor at the county fair saw an article in the newspaper about Marines on Guadalcanal using civilian rifles. He said he wondered if that might be you, since you were always stubborn about that Remington I thought was too cheap. I told him it probably was, because you never did care what people thought about your methods as long as they worked. I am proud of you, son. Come home safe. Daniel read the letter twice, feeling a connection to home that had seemed impossibly distant during the brutal months of jungle fighting. His father understood something that many military officers had struggled to accept, that practical effectiveness mattered more than conforming to expectations. That principle had guided Daniel's life on the Montana ranch and now shaped his service in a tropical war zone thousands of miles from anything familiar. By January 1943, Guadalcanal was secured, and American forces began planning offensive operations against other Japanese-held islands. Daniel's methods had been documented and disseminated throughout Marine units, influencing doctrine development for subsequent campaigns. The lessons learned about flexibility, patience, and the value of unconventional approaches would affect how the Corps trained and equipped marksmen for the remainder of the conflict. The psychological impact extended beyond immediate military effectiveness. Japanese commanders, accustomed to viewing American forces as technologically dependent and tactically predictable, had to confront the reality that their opponents could match their patience and exceed their precision. The recognition that Americans included soldiers with deep practical skills gained through civilian life, not just formal military training, complicated their strategic calculations. Daniel's story spread beyond his immediate unit, becoming a symbol of American adaptability and individual initiative. In barracks conversations and letters home, Marines discussed the farm boy with a catalogue rifle who had outsniped trained enemy marksmen, using methods learned protecting cattle in Montana. The story resonated because it reflected values central to American identity, the belief that practical skill and determination could overcome formal expertise and institutional authority. For Daniel himself, the experience confirmed lessons his father had taught him during those early years, learning to shoot on the ranch. The most expensive equipment meant nothing without skill and discipline. Patience almost always defeated aggression. Understanding your environment and your opponent mattered more than raw capability. And sometimes, the wisdom dismissed by experts proved more valuable than doctrines developed by institutions. The Remington rifle that had cost $23.50, ordered from a catalogue by a 16-year-old boy who could not afford expensive hunting equipment, had proven its worth in circumstances its designers never imagined. It had eliminated enemy threats, saved American lives, and challenged assumptions about military procurement and doctrine. But more importantly, it represented an idea that resonated throughout the ranks, that individual Americans, drawing on diverse experiences and backgrounds, could contribute to victory in ways no institutional training could anticipate. When Daniel finally rotated home in March 1943, after 7 months of combat operations, he carried the Remington with him through official channels. Its status changed from recreational use only to personal weapon, approved for combat operations. He had been awarded the Navy Cross for his actions, though the citation focused on his courage and initiative, rather than the unconventional equipment that had enabled his success. The medal meant less to him than the knowledge that his methods had been studied and adopted, potentially saving countless lives in future operations. Years later, after the conflict ended, and veterans began sharing their experiences with civilians who had not witnessed the realities of Pacific combat, Daniel would occasionally be asked about that morning in August, when he first demonstrated what could be accomplished with patience, skill, and a mail-order rifle. His response was always the same. The rifle was just a tool, no better or worse than any other, until placed in hands that understood how to use it properly. What mattered was the willingness to question assumptions, adapt to circumstances, and trust practical experience even when it contradicted institutional wisdom. The Marines who had laughed at his civilian rifle that first morning understood this lesson by the end. Corporal Mitchell, who had watched those first 3 shots eliminate targets that had evaded detection for days, became one of Daniel's strongest advocates. He wrote in his personal diary, later published in a collection of wartime accounts, that watching Kershaw work had been like witnessing a master craftsman demonstrate techniques that seemed simple only because years of practice had made them natural. The diary entry concluded with an observation that captured the essence of what Daniel had accomplished. We assumed that military training was superior to civilian experience. He proved that sometimes the opposite is true, and that wisdom can come from unexpected places if we are humble enough to recognize it. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Do not forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.